This video is sponsored by Setapp. The iPhone XS and the new iPhone 11 Pro have a lot of similarities, but one of the main differences between these two devices is the new triple lens camera system that's found on the 11 Pro. And so in this video, we're gonna find out whether or not the new cameras on the 11 Pro are worth the upgrade over the XS Max. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to get notifications whenever we share a video. So for this video, we're comparing the iPhone XS Max to the new iPhone 11 Pro Max. And so starting off with the introduction that you saw, we demonstrated the recording quality between the front-facing cameras of the two phones. The main differences here, aside from the higher 12 megapixel camera over the last year's 7 megapixel, is the inclusion of 4K 60 frames per second on the 11 Pro. Apple also added slow motion video, 1080p at 120 frames per second to the front-facing camera, and it works really well for those who want to take slow motion selfies, aka slowfies, which I took on my last video for the first impressions, which is what you're seeing now. I refuse to take any more. I'm just not a big fan. Plus, there's not a lot going on behind me that's really cool to test out. And I haven't had that opportunity quite yet, so I really just don't want to keep shaking my head back and forth. But for now, you can enjoy my first and hopefully only slowfie. From a stills perspective, I don't think the quality difference between the two front-facing cameras is really all that dramatic, but it does seem like Apple removed the so-called beauty filter that was kind of applied to the selfies on the iPhone XS Max. It kind of added that smoothing effect to your face, and not a whole lot of people really like that. Personally, I didn't care. It made me look beautiful. The camera is also wider on the 11 than the XS Max, so you're able to capture a bit more of the background in your pictures if you use the front-facing camera in landscape mode. On the back of the phone, we'll find a 12 megapixel telephoto and wide angle lenses like there was on the XS Max, but this year, Apple also added a third 12 megapixel ultra wide angle lens. Now, before we get into more details on the ultra wide angle lens, let's take a look at the photos that came from the other two lenses. This was the most intriguing to me because I was curious how the lens quality of the 11 Pro and the XS Max compares. Honestly, I didn't notice much of a difference. I think in some images, the 11 Pro has a slightly sharper look and feel to the image, but I also think that some of the images were getting a bit blown out on the 11 Pro. I'm not sure if the highlights are being cranked up more with the 11 Pro or the shadows of the images are a bit lower on the XS Max, but this photo of the pavement is a good reference or kind of a good idea of what I'm talking about. The pavement appears to be darker around the yellow line as opposed to the 11 Pro, but this could be due to a change in lighting as well. I don't really know for sure. Regardless, I don't think photos are really that much better on the 11 Pro compared to the XS Max. Some images do turn out better than others, but it's really just not a significant difference. That could change later this year when Apple introduces its new Deep Fusion feature, which will combine multiple images for sharper, crisper photos. I was also wondering if edge detection on the 11 Pro would have been improved with the new hardware in portrait mode compared to the XS Max, and while both phones do a fantastic job, one image doesn't look any better or worse than the other. They're almost identical. What is new to this year is the wide angle camera is capable of taking portrait photos, and while it looks really cool to have the wider depth of field, I found it much harder to focus in on the subject, and the camera kind of struggled to separate that subject and foreground at certain times. Overall, especially when taking pictures outdoors, which is probably one of the more common places people are taking pictures with their phones, the image quality between these two phones are very similar. Now, the biggest difference lies within the ultra-wide sensor, as well as the improvements made to low-light photography with the inclusion of the new night mode option and the improved sensor for the wide-angle camera. The ultra-wide angle lens is 13 millimeters, which is very wide, so much so that every time I switch to the ultra-wide camera, you can actually see my hand in most of the shots. Most ultra-wide cameras also lose quite a bit of quality, and the images don't really look quite as nice, which is why a lot of people don't take a whole lot of ultra-wide photos. Apple's ultra-wide camera isn't as good as its wide-angle camera, and it doesn't have optical image stabilization, but in the right conditions, it still looks pretty good. As you can see here, the image quality that is lost is not something that most people will probably notice, with the obvious benefits of fitting a lot more into the frame. This is perfect for cityscapes or large group photos. When I was bumming around the streets of Cleveland with an ultra-wide camera, it really made for some fantastic photos, and I'm so glad that Apple finally included this on its phone. The ultra-wide camera is also available during video recording, giving you the ability to use all 3 angles. Video recording on each phone yielded nearly the same results as our initial photo tests, meaning the image might be slightly better on the 11 Pro, but there really isn't that much of a difference between the image quality or even in stabilization. If you do really want to see a drastic difference, take pictures in low light to nearly pitch black environments and watch the difference between the new night mode on the 11 Pro and what you get on the XS Max. Now, the images are obviously not going to be as sharp as what you would get in good lighting conditions, but it actually makes it possible to have a somewhat decent photo when it's nearly pitch black outside compared to just not having a photo at all. The night mode can offer exposure times ranging anywhere from 1 second to up to 10 seconds for extreme low light conditions. Night mode style effects have been around on Android devices for some time now, but it's new to iPhone users and it's a pretty fantastic experience. As you can see in these photos, the images yield a drastic difference when lighting was nearly non-existent. Even photos where you might not be using night mode, but it's still pretty dark outside, the images just look a lot better on the 11 Pro compared to the XS Max. If you're an avid iPhone photographer upgrading from the XS to the 11 Pro, it will feel like a drastic improvement thanks to these low light photos and the new ultra wide angle camera. We're also going to be comparing the 11 and the 11 Pro to some other devices here in the near future, so be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those videos. I'd also love to know what you thought about the images from the XS Max compared to the 11 Pro. Do you agree with me that there really isn't that big of a difference in standard lighting conditions outside using the telephoto and the wide angle lens, but it's totally worth having that ultra wide angle lens as well as night mode? Or is it maybe not worth an upgrade for some of you out there? I would love to know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Before we end today's video, I do want to give more information about this month's channel sponsor, Setapp. Setapp is one of the best places to find new and useful applications for your Mac. It packs over 150 Mac apps into just one, and every app's developer on Setapp provides full support and seamless updates for their creations so that you can focus on what you're working on. Since data is largely cloud-based, it only makes sense that apps should be too, and so Setapp installs and uninstalls apps instantly, all while retaining your settings so that you can have it all without hogging any space. There are so many applications that I use on a daily basis from Setapp, like Paste, Sip, Downy, and much more, with new apps being added constantly, as well as consistent free updates to existing applications. Go ahead and use Setapp completely free for the first week to see if it fits with your workflow by clicking the link in the description down below. This has been Dan with Mac Rumors. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you around in the next video.